Okay, so we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the PdBA Lisboa online talk. I am Lia Carreira. I'm the curator and manager of the project Palácio de Belas Artes Lisboa, which is PdBA for short. It's an independent project that has, through its platform, online platform, exhibitions, public talks, workshops, and residencies, both in Lisbon and at an international level. We invite artists, curators, and a whole set of different creatives and researchers to reimagine the possibilities of a different relationship between the physical and the digital space. We work around a particular palace, which is the Palácio Iglesias, but I won't talk about this because we have a bunch of other online sessions and materials online on our platform that you can check and learn about this Palacio and why we focus on this particular physical space and why we try to mirror it digitally through different modalities. This year, 2024 and 2025 theme for the PdBA is digital spatialities, where we hosted a series of talks on this topic, but specifically a panel session in Lisbon at the Goethe Institute. So if you want to learn a bit more about this topic, which this talk today is a bit related to that, you can go ahead and also see the sessions on our YouTube channel. Today's session specifically is entitled Computational Visualities, and we invite Professor Carloalberto Treccani from the Hong Kong Baptist University to discuss how machines see the world and ultimately how our own understanding and practices excuse me, of vision and visuality has been increasingly influenced and shaped by what has been considered visually intelligent machines. And he's going to explain a little bit more about this, I hope, but basically some machines that are capable of seeing and making sense of what they see. So Carloalberto Treccani is a professor of the Department of Humanities and Creative Writing of the Hong Kong Baptist University and co-anchor of the Creativity, Self and Society group. He is currently working on a book titled Vision, Visual Perception and Visuality in the Ages of Intelligent Machines. He has also recently published a wonderful paper on how sometimes our eyes don't see, discussing how machine vision, while it has been deeply dependent on photographic databases, it has now been reversed and strengthened by this process as we find contemporary photographic imagery being significantly influenced by the techniques developed by computer sciences. So I also invite you to check his work online. And these techniques and systems, they can range, and I think Carloalberto is going to show a lot of these examples throughout the talk today, between autonomous vehicle, medical imaging, vehicle plate recognition, for example, among other examples that we've seen all around the news and media, as we know. And this session is also supported by the Portuguese National Museum of Natural History and Science, so MUHNAC, where we had the pleasure to develop research that resulted on our current online exhibition, which is Flavors That Have Been Forgotten, which is now live on our platform. And invite you also to check that out and experience it on your own. And during our research at MUHNAC, we got to see how they're working with different machines and different levels of intelligence, machines that see from a very basic photographic process that helps researcher expand their own, the limits of the human eye and their own understanding of the subjects they work with. So I do also invite you to check out MUHNAC's website and the work that they do. Do visit the museum as well. It's an amazing museum. So this session is important overall in the sense that it goes beyond this hype of discussing artificial intelligence as a buzzword that we see nowadays all around a different field, and especially in the arts. And we want to instead discuss this pervasiveness of computation and the idea of visuality in our current practices. We have today a focus on this intelligent machine. So Carloalberto has then been invited to expand our notions of what it is to see, discussing the roles played by these processes in everyday life, in labor conditions, and their ethical and social and cultural implications as well. For those from the natural sciences, since this talk is also being promoted throughout the MUHNAC's network, I highly recommend checking also Carloalberto's thesis and his 2019 article for AI and Society journal, where he discusses with key examples from the natural sciences how it is necessary to rethink vision theory in terms of trial and error to offer a new approach to better understand vision, be it biological or artificial. That said, that was a big introduction. I want to welcome our guest today. So, hi, Carloalberto. Welcome to our online talk. The floor is yours. Welcome, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I feel a bit embarrassed right now. And
Don't.
hi, everybody. Hi, everybody, and thanks for being here. I hope you can hear me fine, but I think yes, because we tested. So first of all, let me thank you for having invited me and for having organized this event. So thank you again. I think in order to start our journey, I would like to share like a couple of information with you. When Leah asked me or invited me to give this talk, she asked me to talk about machine vision in connection with the Museum of Natural Science. And I immediately said yes, but however, I regretted it immediately as well, because I realized that I had no idea what those two words they have in common, right? And so I wanted to text her back and say, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. But then after a while, I realized that Leah foresaw something that back then I hadn't foreseen. And that is the fact that some of the problem within the machine vision domain are exactly the problem that the natural sciences as well as museums, they faced decades or perhaps even centuries ago. And because of that, they can provide a lot of interesting insight to the domain of computer vision or computer science at large. And so during the talk, I will try to highlight a couple of ideas. I will not dig into it too much, but I think there will be space in the Q&A session to talk about those connecting points in the Q&A session. The second piece of information is about the content of today's presentation and our journey within the domain of vision. Obviously, we will try to answer the question of what does it mean to see, but we will try to do it following the development of so-called visually intelligent machines, or machine vision or computer vision, call it as you prefer. I think in order to start, we probably should also clarify what is a machine vision. And perhaps we can simply say any type of system or any type of device that somehow has to deal with the visual world, with the world that we see, and somehow to extract meaningful information from it. A self-driving car, for example, has machine vision capabilities. Your iPhone has some kind of machine vision capabilities. You can text you can ask your phone to show you the photograph of your grandma or your grandpa or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and the phone automatically will select only those photographs where those persons are present. Smart gate or intelligent gate at airports, they use some kind of machine vision system in order to match your face with databases of face, and eventually and check whether you are the person that you claim to be, and many other examples. Another things that perhaps we should also do is to ask ourselves, so okay, but then what does it mean to see? And perhaps the most immediate answer is to know where what is by seeing it, right? It sounds a bit complicated, but it's not. Perhaps we can put it in other words, is to locate, like spatially, right, what is present in the world, and to recognize what that object is. Okay, so it's to recognize a specific object within the space, within the world. And this is something quite that we as human beings, we do it effortlessly, and we don't pay attention to it. We do it in real times, almost unconsciously, and it seems quite a very kind of trivial to ask this question: what does it mean to see? Oh, I open my eyes, I see the world, and I have no problem at all. But I would like you to try to run like a quick test that somehow will show how vision is quite complex. So imagine that you have to teach a kid what is a glass. Okay, I have here a glass. And then you may want to tell the kid, oh, a glass, this is a glass and it's a yellow glass. What about if you take a green glass? The kids may want to ask you, oh, is this still a glass? And then you may want to say, yes, it's a glass, but it's in green color. And what about if the glass has another shape, perhaps a very bizarre shapes? Then you want to say, yes, it's a glass, but with another shape. And then we can continue. So what about a glass that is made with in porcelain, right? And here, for example, I already face myself some problem. Do we call it glass or do we call it cup? And so already we start to see that there's a lot of problems. So what is a glass? How you define a glass? What's the uniqueness of a glass? The characteristic, and perhaps you may want to reply me, oh, it's about its function. It allows you to drink, it allows to contain some liquid. But then I may want to say, okay, then any concave object may be utilized as a glass or as a container, right? And this can escalate to, and we can ask ourselves like other types of questions. But the point is to realize that we don't really know how to explain why we see what we see and why what we see is what we see, right? We call it glass, but why these terms and what's the visual characteristic that define a glass? And then there's also another set of problems. So where is located the glass? The glass is on a table, and therefore I need to estimate the distance to the glass. And then I also need to estimate the shape in order to grasp it, right? And this is all what's going on in our brain in real time. We have no idea of what's going on, but as you can see, there's like a bunch of things, a lot of complex and very sophisticated things that going on whenever we want to simply take a glass. This, for example, is a problem in the industrial world. Like this is called the grasping problem, when you have a machine that has to somehow deal with some kind of pieces. When the piece it's misplaced, even just for a few millimeters, the machine suddenly goes crazy and cannot perform any task anymore, right? And this is it's quite a big problem that companies are trying to fix. So perhaps you have realized already how vision is difficult, and there's also a funny story within the computer vision world or domain that is called, that many knows, that is called the Summer Vision Project. Now the story and the story goes in this way. There are a couple of MIT is a true story. A couple of MIT professors in the 60s, I think 66, if I remember correctly, that they decided to run this Summer Vision Project. The idea was that of some teaching a computer to recognize certain objects in the world. They took a video camera, connected with a computer, and then they thought that this would have been enough. And in fact, they planned to run this study within a summer, hence the name. And they hired a couple of undergrad assistants to run because they thought that, oh, this should be quite simple. However, this experiment since the 60s is still going on because scientists, they never completely solved the problem of vision. And it's only in the 60s when scientists start to build those kind of intelligent machines that they realize how vision was difficult and largely misunderstood. And nowadays we have a lot of machines that they can do amazing things. They can outperform us in what are called vision tasks. But for example, they still fail to recognize very simple objects. And I have here an example, maybe, let me see. This is a very famous video on the YouTube of a Tesla that thinks that the sun is a street light, right? And as you can see, every time it sees the sun, it thinks that is a street light, and it doesn't break simply because, lucky enough, the sun is orange. So the machine thinks that it's orange, and then it doesn't need exactly to break yet, right? Otherwise, probably the machine would have braked and stopped the car immediately in the middle of the road. But then you may want to say, yes, those machines, they call it are the intelligence machines, but they are just very dumb. They are just very stupid. But then also the natural domain presents quite a lot of problem. And this was a story that was popular a few years ago, when a couple of scientists, I think a couple of biologists in Australia, they realized that this type of beetle start to mate with beer bottle, to the point that they almost get extinct. What the scientists what the scientists noticed is that those kind of specific type of beetles were used to mate with those kind of beer bottle that you can see, and they were shocked because they had no idea what's going on, why this very weird and bizarre behavior. And this behavior, by the way, really brought these kind of species almost to extinction. But then they realized something quite interesting, that the bottle in this kind of brownish goldish color with this dotted surface was the same surface of a female beetle, right? But then, as often is the case in the natural world, the bigger, the better it is, right? So the male beetle tried to mate with bottles simply because they thought they were like female beetles, big female beetles, right? To the point that the Australian government, they have to somehow stop the production of this type of bottle. And in fact, if you go in Australia right now, in the area where this kind of beetle is present, you will not find any more those kind of beer bottle. So as you can see, we as animal, humans included, beetles included, we have our problem with dealing with the visual world, right? And I think there's perhaps to let me do the idea. Perhaps I can also try to enter a bit more this kind of problem of vision with another story. This, what you are seeing right now on the screen, is how the planet Earth looked like 500 millions of years ago. For hundreds of millions of years, the planet Earth was filled by simple animals. They were usually very simple, composed by not too many cells. They were soft bodies. There were no brain. There were no eyes, but this was not a problem at all. They were used to eat only when the food literally bumped into them. But again, this was not a problem because their body was used to this long period of starvation, right? And so life was okay, life was very mellow, and everything was fine. However, 500 millions of years ago, approximately, something happened, and this is what scientists call the Cambrian explosion. And this is a very interesting period of time, even though a very short period of time, because the number of animals and the number of species of animals exploded to the point that this period is also called the Big Bang of evolution. And this Big Bang is still one of the most interesting mysteries in the evolution. And there are many different theories that try to explain why suddenly the number of animals and the number of species of animals exploded. But the most interesting one, or perhaps the most convincing one to me, or probably simply because I'm really interested into vision studies, is the one from Andrew Parker. And according to Parker, the Cambrian explosion was triggered by the sudden evolution of vision. The change in the atmosphere allows the light to arrive on Earth, right? And the arrival of light triggered the appearance of the first eye. So in Parker theories, this means that active predation became possible. So animals start to go out and search for food, while prey species start to quickly to find ways to hide themselves in order not to be prey. So vision completely changed the behavior of animals. They completely changed their body, and vision, according to Parker, completely changed the world. The appearance of the first eye completely changed the behavior of animals and completely changed the world. But then, with a sort of like a very pyrotechnic jump, we arrived in Italy, and we are in the 15th century's Italy, an environment, or perhaps I should call it a visual environment, that is way more complex and sophisticated if compared to that of 500 millions of years ago. And in this new particular context, to see doesn't only mean to survive in the strict sense of the meaning of the word survive, but it means to navigate an environment that is not only a natural environment, but is also artificially made, that is full of images, an environment that then requires visual abilities or visual skills or new level of readings, right? And for example, like we know more or less how to read this painting, right? We know that there are some perspective problems, but we understand that, for example, the sky is in the background, that there are two figures in the foreground, that they are talking with each other. The architecture seems a bit weird, but we get an idea, right? And we have this idea either because you are Christian, either because you grew up in a Christian countries, or either because you simply have read the history of the Annunciation, or right. But we can run another kind of experiment again, and we can imagine for a second that all the Christian doctrine suddenly disappear or have been lost. And a person might suppose that the two figures, the Archangel Gabriel and Mary, they are somehow turning like a kind of devoted attention to the column. In fact, if you pay attention, and there are some perspectival error in the two figures, they're not looking at each other, but they are looking at the column, right? So to see means to survive, of course, but also to navigate an historical and cultural context. And in this context, to see is the ability to extract and abstract useful information from an image. And as I said before, since the 60s, computer science has been trying to teach machine and algorithm to see, and more importantly, to understand what they see. This is what is called usually image recognition. However, this process of, again, signification, that is apparently simple for human beings, remain particularly complex for machines. For a camera, for example, there is no difference between a banana or a kid, right? And you may want to say, oh, that's okay. But think about that this is like a self-driving car. The car needs to understand that, oh, okay, it's a banana and then I can drive straight. Oh, no, it's a kid and then it's better I brake, right? Although this is quite a difficult example, there's really no difference for a simple camera that has no form of understanding, no form of intelligence, no form of thinking, to trace any difference between a kid and a banana, right? So, and this has been quite a problem until the late 90s or early 2000s, when with the arrival of internet, and scientists realized that, oh, okay, we can use the internet as a thing, right, to teach machines and algorithms what they see. So thanks to crowdsourcing platform like Amazon, I've forgotten the name now. What's the name, Liam? The Amazon one?
Crowdsourcing?
Okay.
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
You mean capture? I was going to think about
later we will talk about capture.
Yeah,
no, in this case, the idea of scientists was that of simply using the internet hire a bunch of people, usually in poor countries, to basically simply ask them to label what they see. So you hire somebody from the other side of the world. This person has to stay in front of the computer. The computer shows this person like an image of a strawberry, for example, and they have to type the label strawberry, right? And then this label is assigned to the image that then together with many other images, other millions of other images, they are categorized by the label or the so-called semantic label that they receive, collected in database, and then use this database to train machine and algorithm.
I know today we talk about mechanical Turks, like the term itself.
Mechanical.
Is that you mean? Okay.
Exactly,
yes,
exactly.
Okay. That's the word.
Exactly. Those so-called Turkers, for example, they also need to perform other type of action in order to teach, to train a machines to see and recognize what they see. For example, they need to trace the outlines of an object in order to teach a machine to recognize and distinguish a fork from a knife, a plate from a glass. This is what is called object classification, right? They have also to perform other type of tasks. This is called object detection and object location, to trace bounding box to locate where people, in this case, people and car, are in a given image. Or they also have to perform other type of tasks like scene understanding. They have to tell a machine what's going on in a specific scene, right? However, this simple idea that has been extremely useful, and this idea is at the very core of what we call machine vision, right? Presented and still present us a series of problems. Obviously, nowadays, this is a slightly outdated technique. There are much fancier and more sophisticated technique like self-supervised, unsupervised technique, and et cetera, et cetera. But the core idea behind what we call machine vision is exactly this one. Take a bunch of people and tell them to train machine, to tell a machine what is going on in a scene or what is present in a scene. However, at the beginning, this job presented a lot of problems. The workers, for example, they were paid in pennies for images, and they were working in precarious condition, and because of that, they were kind of this caused a lot of insufficient and confusing labeling. In fact, the first machines, they were quite inaccurate in discriminate two different kind of objects or two different images. And maybe I think I'm taking too much time, so I will try to speed it up a little bit. And behind this idea, there's a famous computer scientist called Fei-Fei Li. And this is what she said a while ago while presenting this technique. If you consider a child's eyes as a pair of biological camera, they take one picture every 200 milliseconds. So by the age of 3, a child will have hundreds of millions of pictures of the real world. So, Fei-Fei Li say, my insight was to give the algorithm the kind of training data that a child was given by experience in both quantity and quality. So the idea is to train a machine in the same ways that you may want to teach a kid to recognize what is a glass, as we did before. What she's saying here is that the idea of feeding machine and algorithm with millions of labeled images came from the way a child built his or her ability to see and understand the world while growing and while physically interacting with the world. But by saying so, she's also tracing some equivalence between the human and the machines, the eye, the biological eye, and the eye of a camera. The experience of a kid while growing up and the training experience of a machine, the way of looking of a kid and the way of looking of a machine. And by doing so, the computer becomes more biological while the child becomes more robotic or artificial. And the border between the two seems somehow fading away. But there are also a set of other problems that they seem minor, but somehow, again, they allow us to understand how vision is particularly complex. During the labeling process, one or more or perhaps even more terms are assigned to an image, and various actions are performed to the images. The terms and action are used to define a picture or parts of a picture or subject or entity within a picture. But it's possible to somehow to summarize, to reduce the visual experience to a bunch of words and lines. For example, like how you will call those objects. Some of you may have idea, I really have no idea, but already this presents a problem. While I'm certainly able to see, to recognize more or less what they are, or I think that they belong to some kind of lab in some university or companies, but how a Turker, how an annotator, how one of those workers may approach or may label one of these objects in a chemical laboratory. The use of, for example, of synonyms can also be problematic. The use of plural and singular form or terms in another language is again create also a lot of problem. Or how, for example, I can label an image that is reflected in a mirror. Should I label with, for example, like if my image is reflected in a mirror, should I label it with my name? Should I label it as part of the mirror? Is a human figure reflected in a mirror? And there's a lot of kind of problems and issues behind this kind of work. Or, for example, like how precisely an object profile should be traced. If there's a tree, should I trace only the outline? Should I trace all the leaves? Should I trace also the texture on the leaves? How precisely should be done, right? And the series of a lot of problems. To the point that a while ago, I think 6 or 7 years ago, an artist called Karen Zack realized this sort of like a collection where machines somehow cannot really discriminate a Labrador from a fried chicken or a muffin from a Chihuahua, right? This is a very funny, bizarre, a very funny example. Nowadays, probably will, I guess it will not be a problem anymore, but back then was quite funny, and personally, I think it's still very funny. But then in around 2010, 2011, a second idea for training machines to recognize images appeared when internet companies realized that they could utilize our online activities to train their machines, right? So every time we make a click, we are not conveying some information, but we are also establishing a pedagogical process. We are training machines to see and recognize what they see. This is, for example, like a CAPTCHA. I'm sure all of you are familiar with it, and usually they are words and numbers and displayed in very bizarre shapes in order to verify that you are a human being and you can somehow understand what's in a scene and you are not a bot. But then in
sometimes
2000,
you fail at the human test.
Yeah, exactly. Good job, Leah. But then in 2010, Google introduced a new type of CAPTCHA. And if you pay attention, this CAPTCHA on my left is actually a picture from Google Street View. But why Google decided to use picture from Google Street View and to use road number in their CAPTCHA? The reason is that while we are solving this CAPTCHA, we are not only proving that we are human beings, but at the same time, we are helping the Google algorithm to learn and to read street sign and house numbers, for example. So CAPTCHA initially was a technique actually to prevent spam and to prevent both from accessing online services. Then it quickly became a system used by Google for the purpose to train their algorithm to recognize texts and number. But then, and this is something that I think we are more familiar, more recently, those CAPTCHA, they evolved into a more visual or a more photographic form. So whenever you bump into a CAPTCHA that asks you to recognize or to draw a line around a specific object, what we are doing is actually we are simply training Google algorithm to recognize and understand images. And we are sort of like establishing like a labor and a labor relation with Google without actually being paid at all. So whenever, whether we are watching, commenting, clicking, texting, sharing, what we are doing is we are working from Google. But there's also, I think, another type of problem that emerge, and again, that are in connection with the problem of the natural sciences, as well as the, and probably even more importantly, the problem that museums face. For example, like whether it is ethical to use online images to train machine and algorithm. Is it ethical to use kind of images like my images for purposes that are other than those simply like sharing my image with my friend or something? Is it okay for them to use my images for Google, for Meta, for Instagram, to use my images to train their system? Is it okay? They should ask my permission. Sometimes there's no permission at all. There's a lot of kind of cases in the last few years where big companies, sometimes university, they simply run a lot of tests using images of captured by surveillance cameras without telling anything to anybody. But here, for example, I think is another point of connection, because natural sciences museum, for example, they always have to deal with the problem of displaying, for example, like human remains, right? Well, and taking in consideration, for example, like the deceased dignities, the wishes of the descendants, and the potential for public education and scientific research as well at the same time, right? So I think that here we also have another point of connection where perhaps museum can somehow teach, allow me to use these terms, like company, in order to how to be more ethically correct when using online images. Let me put it in
And I
this
can
way.
add to that as well the fact that, well, we reached a consensus that we need to consult the communities and the people that are involved with that particular object or image. So not only you need permissions, and you need to be respectful of their memories and their authorship as well, but you need to also consult them on how they want to be displayed, or if at all, and so on. And you can also add museums in general, especially also like archiving, and that goes beyond the museum or the art institution in general. Any forms of data cataloging, right? And we do that a lot in museums for our collections, but also in the archives for their collections and so on. That's we also deal with the issues that you were bringing in before, which is how do you, if you see in an image, how are you going to describe that, with what words? And then you have nowadays in the field the discussion specifically boosted by artificial intelligence of discussing biases in these descriptors, right? Or what terms they're using, and specifically when you talk about other communities and or gender issues or representation and identity, but you're also thinking about certain objects, because like you said, there were people like the Mechanical Turks in museums a long, long time ago, classifying each and single objects, let's say from the Met, and the MUHNAC, for example, has millions and millions of objects. So how eventually you get tired or eventually start seeing double, or things that are not seem like a vase, but maybe it's a completely different thing. So you need to also be knowledgeable about the things that you're seeing to be able to classify them and connect them and set them in a network within a collection, right?
Yeah, this is the problem, for example, like of the taxonomy, right? That within the natural sciences, they solved it in the 19th century, no, in the 18th centuries, right? With Linnaeus, right? That somehow came up with a sort of like a way
Standard,
to
yeah.
catalog, and to order the natural world, right? And this is a problem that in the natural sciences has been solved like more than 2 centuries ago, right? And and more or less what kind of big companies are doing, or they have done for years, is the same. Try to order the visual world by attaching labels and organize this label in different kind of category and subcategory and etc., right? So again, going back to the very beginning, I thought that really like the perhaps we can call it this like a visual taxonomies, but it's really like a problem that within the natural sciences and has been solved, and perhaps there's like a point of connection where the two realities somehow they can talk. Obviously, there are specificities and difference, but I think that again, the problem that you are bringing up is a very important problem that within the computer sciences are only facing in the last, I would say, few decades, while in the natural sciences has been there since a century.
And my argument as well is for museums of technology, because you also think about, or media art museums, think, oh, this is like the newest, of the new. And also in contemporary art museums. So you think that national history museums, or natural anthropology museums, or ethnographic museums, they are old style museums, and they have nothing to offer in terms of new technology or in terms of artificial intelligence. And my argument and the purpose also for bringing you for this talk, and the importance of this talk, is exactly that, is that to show that, no, actually, and I like the images that you brought right in the beginning, between not seeing anything, and then suddenly you have that image of what we learn in art history, right? The perspective issue in painting. We start from there on, and we don't consider the fact that there's a lot more about visuality and vision, and how to see and what to see, that goes way before what we learn in art history and how we start in art history. And so there's a lot from these museums that can be learned in terms of subject, but like you said, like in terms of standardization, of ethical, um, legislations or regulations, that's already being widely used, and so on. So there's a lot of connections to be made, and things to be demystified in terms of a new museum and an old style museum, and so on.
I think there's also another interesting point that it's quite interesting, because I think that is an issue that the natural sciences and the computer sciences are facing nowadays at the same time, which is, for example, like race issues, right? And the use of, for example, of the term race, right? That it became quite a debatable nowadays within the natural sciences. Whether should we use it? Can we use it? Is it correct? It's not. Exactly, it's not correct. And I will use the word funny, even though there's nothing funny at all. Is exactly one of the problems that those big tech companies are facing as well.
And think about also in terms of gender, is the same thing.
Yeah.
She, he, her, they. So this is something that is struggling.
Yeah. It's quite interesting talking with you right now, because actually it's just right now that I'm realizing how those point of contact are much more than what I previously thought when I was preparing for this talk. For example, like there are things that now pop up and say, oh yeah, actually there's much more behind it I haven't thought, but
this is why we have this conversation. So I would take the opportunity actually to invite those who are watching. So we have people watching, and the chat's also going to be available later on for people to watch the video again, or start the video at new, and follow up the conversation as well. So I invite those watching to pose questions through the chat, and we will read them throughout the conversation. But we also have a few minutes at the end to pose them, if that's the moment for that. So please post questions on the chat and we'll read them. Go ahead, Carloalberto.
I think maybe we can really I can skip a lot of slides, but just
don't
to
worry
try
about
to
time.
conclude.
We're online. We don't have anywhere else to go.
There's no time online.
We're at home. There's no one's gonna kick us out from the venue, so we're fine.
No, perhaps really like to try to summarize and to bring the discussion more to the cultural domain that perhaps a lot of us belongs to. We can raise like we can draw some consideration or raise some question, and the first one is that machine vision is kind of is shaped by the history of seeing, and and because of this, machine vision is not only technological but it's also and it's also cultural, right? And because exactly as you just said, machine vision incorporate cultural assumption and visual ideologies, biases, and perspective and views, right? That necessarily we have to take in consideration when talking about vision. Usually, we see only as a sort of like as a physiological process, right? But actually involve much more. And in fact, there is like an ongoing debate whether seeing is just about seeing, whether seeing involve knowing, or whether seeing is also about thinking, right? So whether seeing involves some higher kind of cognitive faculties that generally we call thinking, and because we think differently, then we see differently. And perhaps um, I also thought that I wanted to somehow to expand and to somehow go a bit outside the domain of vision, given the current debate about artificial intelligence. And funny enough, the development of what we nowadays we call artificial intelligence is exactly came from the development of visual intelligence machines, right? So there's again, even here, a funny parallelism that the evolution of the first tentative of building visual intelligence machines turns out to be like the very base, the foundation of what right now we call AI, and I find it quite interesting, this kind of evolution. For example, the retina is simply an extension of the brain, right? So and so we can also think about it. Seeing has a lot to do with intelligence, and and perhaps it's not a case that the development of artificial intelligence, what we call artificial intelligence nowadays, is exactly the evolution. Is in fact just an evolution of what we call machine vision. And I wanted to somehow to try to think about how this kind of idea of visual intelligence has moved just from a model to solve the problem of the world, like how to navigate the world and how to grasp a glass, into a way of living. Nowadays, we have a smartphone, we have smart cities, and we have what we call it, we have smart cars, and etc., etc. But this seems to me that it became almost like a race, and where like we are required to see as a machine, or and we are required to be precise, efficient, and fast, as intelligent as a machine. But however, we cannot but fail and experience our sort of like a inadequacy, right? And so to conclude, I think that we should also try to ask ourselves what we really want from those machines, that they can see like us, they can see more than us, they have so-called superhuman capability, but at the same time, they make us feel a bit sort of like a anxious, and they make us feel a bit kind of constantly concerned. And I wanted to just to conclude with this kind of very kind of vague and abstract idea, and try to somehow to see whether there is any kind of, you may have some answer about this question, and how the idea of visual intelligence can be connected with the idea of artificial intelligence, and all the contemporary implication that artificial intelligence is having, and all the kind of anxieties and issues and problems that is triggering. That's it.
Wonderful. Now that already posed a lot of the questions that I had um, written down before, because I always prepare for some questions. If no one has questions on the chat, I will go ahead and ask them, because that's related to what I had thought. One of them is, well, first, you also wrote an article about noise canceling. that I read, and I
Yeah.
also found it very fascinating in how you correlate that to vision and visuality. So, and visual culture specifically, especially social media culture, taking photos of yourself and selfies, and also this difference that we now have to deal with, that not our own image is not correspondent to how we see ourselves, for example, in the mirror, or how we see ourselves in the camera, and how the end result is also in an image that then is altered to noise cancel, and then change the whole process of what we are actually seeing. So how do you correlate with what you talked about today? And I think that also relates to the fact that we live in a world where narratives are fragile. Truth is fragile, especially when we have deep fakes or fake news, and issues that we like that we deal with every day in life and politics. And we question then our own reality, and we question what we see, not only through machines but in real life, right? Is this what I'm seeing? Is this what I'm reading? Is this what happened? Is How do we now deal with this situation, considering it all?
Yeah, I think that if I may somehow expand a little bit what you said, I'm writing an article about on the idea of AI generated images, right? And the behaviors and the rituals that those images have triggered, and how, by the way, again, the AI generated images are just an extension of machine vision, right? You need to see, like, from vision to representation, perhaps we can say, right? So for me, it's just basically like just the evolution of the same things, and there's no difference. And I'm writing this article where I'm basically arguing the fact that those new type of images are generating a series of of set of new behaviors and new rituals that I noticed, for example, among my students. One day I noticed them having their phone, and then they were keep on enlarging an images like that and examining the images. They were almost like entering the phone with their faces in order to check whether they can find some details that kind of betray the origin of the image and reveals that this is an AI generated images, right? And so here we start to see also the cultural consequences, the cultural implication in our daily life of those images. And I think that they are triggering like a sort of like a culture of suspicious, where every image is somehow is met with a bit of skepticism, like, and even images that are totally fine, that there's no problem at all, that until a few years ago you would have no doubt at all, right? Right now are met with a bit of suspicious, right? And I also remember when I asked my students what they were doing, they reply me, "Oh no, we are simply trying to verify whether this images is true or not." But was funny because it became really like a ritual where they even exchange their expertise, right? Where one say, "Oh, look at these details. I think it's generated because of this," while another brings another set of expertise and say, "No, look at this other part of the images." And then they also try to cross-reference the images and try to check on other platforms whether these images is generated or not, right? And I thought that is very fascinating, the emergence of those kind of rituals or behaviors or practices in connection with AI generated images. And it's exactly here where we are basically witnessing the
Yeah.
finally, I would say, the consequence of what we have talked right now, the consequence of machine vision, the consequence of AI generated images, as well as the consequence of artificial intelligence at large. So I see a lot of going on nowadays.
This makes
And
me think about. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I wanted to say one more thing, that I think the debate around AI is becoming quite interesting right now. And it's not only about whether AI poses a threat to human being. It's not only about those sort of like a catastrophic thinking, right? But there's also another possibility of thinking about AI in daily life. How does it change our beliefs, our way of doing things, our ritual, the way we deal with our work in daily life? And I think that now we are starting to see the fruits of this of the AI of the last I don't know 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, this makes me think about how we are scrutinizing these images in terms of what they are, if they are real or not, because like you, my background is in photography, and my I studied that deeply, and we know that there's all this discussion in terms of theory as well, in terms of the history of photography, that we know that this idea that the image is a perfect index of reality and it's just flawed. The fact that the camera, the photographic camera that we know from the 90s, let's call it, where they were more developed, they had a perfect, let's say, eyes view, doesn't mean that back in the days in the beginning, you know, with the daguerreotypo and things like that, that you didn't question reality and what the camera back then was capturing, because it had flaws. So makes me think about the fact that we're scrutinizing AI image nowadays because it is flawed. It's so flawed that you don't want to be, the idiot that just sent an image through your WhatsApp group or whatever, your Telegram group, that was completely outed to fool people. And I think people don't want to be the fool of not being able to recognize what is something outed and something that is genuine in that sense. But photography itself, whatever shape and form it is, it is not a perfect indexation, reproduction of reality. It changes colors. It depends on what camera you use, or in the time that we used to film, in cameras. That depends on what, if you use Kodak or a different type of film, that would alter completely the result of reality itself. So it really interests me how people are now kind of scrutinizing AI, but not reflecting on the acceleration evolution. And Walter Benjamin talked a lot about this. How things accelerated to the point that we are, but it's all the same kind of process, right? And this also makes me think about the process that we do in museums and art institutions, and we're thinking about, let's take MUHNAC for example, right? And how they're working with photography to grasp and document a really, really tiny little insect. So they need a very potent, photographic apparatus to do this, and in a way that they also have it layered in segments, that you can actually have that same little insect completely focused throughout, right? And then you have also 3D imagery that other museums also do, that would actually create the whole object, the tiny object that you can, move around and change. So when we pose that question of having to scrutinize and have to, just try to see the
Yeah.
flaws of the machine, or where did they get wrong, either by blurring or not focusing well enough, or not reproducing the three, just because you need to sometimes put elements with elements from the image together to compose a 3D image that could eventually, for a scientific purpose, bring out a different result, right? Because it could miss from not being able to look with your own eyes. And even so, like we were discussing, this could be also flawed in different ways. You have this kind of idea that the reproduction will be perfect, but the joints of the image could actually um, seclude some kind of important detail for science, for example.
Mm.
So I'm really thinking that there is a moment that we are now, that the questioning of the image, not only in terms of quality, or in terms of um, alteration, is necessary throughout, right? Because it has really also critical impact, right? Especially if you're working with, in terms of science, in the science museum, you need to be able to properly identify, or properly represent, or properly document that species. So you don't want to make a false uh, you know, arguments around a
Yeah.
flaw in the image. And I think outside of the museum world or the science sphere, we in our daily lives we also feel like that, right? We don't want to um, interpret reality or make presumptions or um, create opinions on everyday elements, especially let's take politics for example. If we can't really analyze and have the knowledge, this is also why it's important to have that in universities or in schools, or how to identify an AI image, or how to identify maybe what's something that's being altered and something that is actually closer to reality as possible, because you also want to be able to interpret your own society and reality and politics, right?
Yeah, yeah. I actually was thinking about like a while ago of like of a strange things. Everybody expected to be floated by tons of AI generated images and fake news, fake images, and etc. etc. But to be honest, we we are not. Yes, we bump into a few images on perhaps or even on a daily basis, but we haven't really witnessing like a sort of like a mass arrival of those type of images that everybody, me included, expected a few
Mm.
months ago, a couple of years ago. And actually, this is quite interesting. It seems to me that even though AI generated images, they can be really sort of like, I would say, even almost perfect. There must be something that somehow stop their diffusion, I find it quite strange the fact that I expected to be completely submerged by crazy things, fake things, weird and blah blah. But I have to say that that against my expectation. We are not, and I even don't see them coming anytime soon. To be honest,
This was
I don't
going to
know whether
be
because
my next question, because one, I think the worry is not only in terms of museology, like the museum sector, but in all other professions, like people have a genuine fear of losing their jobs, and they are losing their jobs also because of this kind of buzz of of CEOs just trying to fit within a market trend of, oh, this is going to be substituted, these are the jobs of the future, let's then do mass layoffs, especially
yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
tech industries, that we see that a lot. So in other industries, like that we think that are not so close related in terms of job market as the tech industry, like take for example the museum sector, but people have still a very strong and genuine fear of losing their jobs to this kind of technology. But at the same time, it is more and more necessary. Like we think about the science making behind that, of having a specific software and specific machinery to be able to capture the detail of such an object that evolve some kind of not only automation process, but evolve some kind of altering or filling in between the gaps, right? There's imagery that you do in terms of what we call artificial intelligence that fills the gaps between, like you're creating a 3D reproduction, right, of an
Mhm.
object. So that's, I mean, and you're saying that basically it's not going as the pace that people are actually promoting, right? Um,
Yeah, but I was really like specifically referring to AI generated images in the sense that in the area of jobs,
mm,
as we are saying, it may be slightly different, and I don't have any strong opinion, but I guess the two things
mm,
are separated, right? Because I'm naturally interested in vision
mm,
and therefore in images as well. I thought about this as a very interesting phenomena. We expected to be completely submerged by those fake, so-called fake images, but we are not. I don't know, and people seems to be reluctant into using those images, whether they're because there is no satisfaction. I don't know whether it's because they are not perfect, whether because it's still too different to meet the expectation from an idea to a prompt to the final images, and because of that is it perhaps is a process that is a bit disappointing. I don't know, but I was expecting to see my Instagram full of shit. But
I do wonder if it also comes to a bubble, because I do see a lot. Maybe because I also research a little bit in terms of what artists are doing in terms of these images as well. And there, I think maybe different scenarios. For example, we have here in Portugal municipalities that are doing their whole billboard, like we have Christmas billboard all made by AI. There's no shame, and they have like no shame in that at all, because it does translate to substituting people that are fit to conduct that work, but now it can be done by one single person that can manage AI generated images. So I wonder if that's yeah, it's really hard to at the moment between me and you, because I'm seeing a completely different scenario, maybe from my bubble.
yeah, I don't, probably as you are right as well. Like my experience here, I don't know, being in Hong Kong, I don't know, I have that kind of this experience where yes, I bump into AI generated content for sure. But if you recall, a few months ago, perhaps like a few years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, we really expected to be completely like an invasion of AI generated images. But I'm not really seeing this, like not in the form of an invasion, at least quantitatively speaking, right? I see images here and there. Sometimes, as you said, municipality, they use it in very arguable way and often with no aesthetic taste at all. But that's another story. But this is another problem. But I really don't see them in the world as much as I thought. It seems that only, like, I don't know, Donald Trump is abusing of them and a few other people, but not that much. I don't see my students, for example. They seems not using it anymore, not because they cannot, because my university grant them a free access to those tools, right? So they can use it. It's
They just
simply,
lost the interest past the buzz, maybe.
yeah, I think at least for now, it didn't reach that kind of level that really allows you to, and perhaps there's also a problem of really maybe also a problem of expectation, right?
Yeah.
You really never get what
Yeah.
you truly want 100%, right? And after a while, you
Right.
say, okay, I'm tired. I really don't use it anymore, unless I really have to do something or something. But I think this kind of step, which is a small step from like a desired image to
Yeah.
actually obtaining that kind of desired image is a big step, and is exactly the gap and the reason why I think people are not really using the batch. But those are only kind of speculation. I have no
No, I
any
think that
data
is
or
right. I've seen also other researchers argument towards that, in the sense that there's a discrepancy in the distance between how they are kind of promoting AI and what the capabilities of AI and the actual reality of applying that, not only in terms of what you're capable of if you're a single person, or let's say a lab of researchers, or if you have a certain type of equipment and a different type of equipment, and then the reality hits you that not all people can produce that specific marketable
yeah.
AI generated image that the people were selling, the image that they were selling about those processes. And in the end, you just frustrated, because you think, even for your own design work, maybe it's like, oh, I can do better and faster. It's not there yet, or it's being actually sold a very different idea of what it actually can do. But anyway, I think we can continue this conversation eternally, because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
I wanted
probably you're
to
right.
I wanted to thank you for bringing all these insightful elements and for starting this conversation. If anyone wants to reach out to us, to you, for any other questions afterwards, feel free to to reach out to the channels. Carloalberto is also on social media. I'm sure you'll be able easily to find him. And so thank you very much, everyone. I want to also invite you all to follow us, the PdPA, and subscribe to our channels to get a bit to know about our project and the upcoming activities. We have a book launch coming up in October, which sums up the past year activities for the PdBA in terms of the topic of digital spatialities. And then we start a whole new program next year, which we'll review soon, the exciting topic and people that are also involved, like Carloalberto. We have a lot of other exciting scholars and artists and curators going to participate in the debate as well. But before we go, I also wanted to thank MUHNAC for supporting this talk and the program and for embracing our artists and our research. And also to thank the Portuguese Directory of the Arts, DG Arte, who also funds us this program and made this talk possible as well. And yeah, Carloalberto, do you have a few last words you want to say to the general public?
No, nothing wise to say to conclude.
No, but your conclusion was perfect.
Allow me, allow me to thank you and thanks all the people here. And it was very interesting, especially the second part, our conversation. It's been quite interesting.
Likewise, likewise. I hope we can continue this in other formats, in other places. Who knows? So thank you very much for your collaboration, your participation. Thank you, everyone watching us. And I think that's it. So
Thank you.